doing great.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's good. We got a show today again, and we are doing what? What are we? What is this whole thing about? Why are we here?
We are talking spin out. So how you can take your service-based business,
Okay.
figure out a process or something that you bring to the table, some intellectual property, process, etc., that you have from the business and turn that into a product.
Yeah, I love it. It's something that I've always been passionate about is, how do you take these secrets or special things that you do in a business, turn it into something scalable
Yeah.
that can be repeated 1,000 times or 100,000 times, and that is a product that helps others repeat what you're doing really well in your service business.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to completely change your service business too and find a whole new revenue stream and something just can fantastically scale your business. So this whole series is really exciting to kind of talk about that process.
Yeah.
And we've been going through a number of episodes where we're talking about how do you find ideas and how do you vet ideas within your service business, and we've talked about a number of things, and today I think we're diving into how do we prioritize and develop a roadmap for the software. And we've kind of gone through the last couple steps where it's figuring out how to get to this stage where we can actually talk about real features and turning this into something that's tangible, internet tangible.
Yeah, so for people who are watching who may have had an idea and they've been brainstorming, maybe a leadership team within a service business has had conversations, said, hey, we should do this. And they have all these ideas, and all these ideas for different features are on the table. Now is the point where you need to prioritize and figure out which do you focus on first, what are the, what does each feature deliver, and what is the priority there for how to focus on, because you got to go piece at a time, put something new together.
And this is fresh for us. We just worked with a service business that is taking their software and spinning it out, and we really worked through a workshop with them to help understand what features we wanted to focus on, because it's something that they've been thinking about for years in their heads. So we want to create this software. So the vision is big, but to get started and launch MVP, a minimum viable product, we really have to limit that down and understand what's our roadmap going to look like.
That was a big part of our job in that one was, they had all these ideas, they've been working on it and thinking about it for a long time. So really getting narrow and what do you start with? What do you build off of? And so this was a big piece there.
Yeah, I agree. So, some of the things that we talk about are just really looking at, how do we understand what features we should develop? And so, one of the things that people forget when they're building a software, and especially if you're a service business and you don't understand the space, and you're kind of at that early stages, there is never 100% usage. You have these 15 features in your head and you think all of them, wow, every client's going to love every one of these features and they're going to come in this every day and use it. And the reality is that a certain subset of features probably gets used a ton, other features never get touched. And when we talk about features, not just the high level ones, but things like, the ability to filter or this type of report. So you have to think about when you're developing your roadmap, how do we understand the right set of features? Because the last thing that you want to do is really have this gap between having 100 features but only 5 of them are used often. Because what that does is that hurts you from a development standpoint. It's hard to maintain all of that. 2, it's hard to document and support all these unused features. And then 3, really, it usually adds to bloat in your software where it can confuse the user and reduce the quality of the experience that they're having. And so by having the kitchen sink, it's actually a detrimental thing. I think of it as like you ever been to one of those restaurants? I've been to one yesterday where you open up the menu and there's 1,000 items. And it's like too much. What I really want is to go to a place where you have 10 really great things.
What are they known for? What is their specialty, right?
And so, I mean, you watch Kitchen Nightmares or any of these others, and Gordon Ramsay, first thing he says if he sees one of those menus is, we got to cut this down to 5 things that you do really well so that people can come here and say, this is the best that I'm getting of these 5 things, instead of having 300 menu items that you do mediocrely. This is a very similar principle to that, which might feel a little bit more tangible, this restaurant idea, but software is the same thing. I don't want 100 mediocre things. I want 5 to 10 really great things that make my life amazing.
And to go to that restaurant analogy, probably what you add to your menu down the road is you might have ideas and things you'd like to introduce, but you're going to get the first few out there. However, the customers that show up and pay, they're probably going to have a lot to say about what it is what they want, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's different than what you initially planned.
Yeah,
so
totally.
You don't want to put this product together with all these features that you just thought were good ideas. So it's kind of
it'd be better to get the restaurant out there with 10 great items and then hear from someone say, I love this, it would be great if you had this. So getting that feedback, which is something that we've talked about a lot, is how do you gain feedback from your users, and that should help drive the roadmap. And we'll talk about that actually, I think, in like the next slide as well.
Cool.
But some things to evaluate when you're considering features. Obviously, cost is one of them, and cost is really, what's the effort and resources to develop that feature out? If it's something that internally is going to take a lot of time, or you need licensing to integrate with third parties, whatever it might be, something that you have to look at is what's the cost to execute. User requests, is this something that is requested by the users a lot? Impact to existing features. If you build this in and you already have a software, how is it going to impact other features? Is it going to need to integrate, change data? Thinking about those things. Anticipated usage rate. Again, getting back to that guide, how often do we think people are going to come in and use that specific feature? And then really user need versus want ratio. I a lot of times call it the pain index, and we've talked about that in prior episodes and some of our other shows, is what's the number of the challenge or pain that people are feeling that feature solves for them. If it's a 1 and it's really low pain and I can live without it, not a big deal. But if it's a huge pain and huge challenge, I want to understand that it's a need versus a want. So it's just a couple things to evaluate on. So we've talked about this before, but this is just that process, of understanding how we look at features. So for those of you out there, we've got users, team, and market. And really what we're doing is gathering ideas from these different places. Hopefully our users are telling us what they want, our team's brainstorming because they're in the industry, and then the market, we're looking at, what are our competitors doing for features, or what alternatives there are. And really we're taking all of that and putting it into a bucket that's a list of ideas. That's features, functionality, improvements, whatever it might be, and we're developing this big long list. What we then want to do from concepts, this list of ideas, is vet them and basically go through what we just said. What's the pain index? How sticky is that feature? What's the cost of implementing it into the system? And what that helps us do is go into the stage where we're looking at a roadmap. How do we plan out those features? And that kind of ties into this prioritization. If we've got limited resources from a time and budget standpoint to develop our software or to make improvements to it, how do we prioritize these ideas into a roadmap? And that should go back to some of these vetting ideas of like, what's the pain index, how sticky is it, what's the cost? Those things help us get the prioritization. And then really from there it's into a backlog, and we'll talk about that in a second, but typically in software development you move features into a backlog for development, and they're sitting there waiting to actually be developed by the developers, and that backlog pushes into agile development process, which we've talked about before.
Makes a lot of sense. I think this whole process could allow someone, that team that has those ideas, really to give them some sense of kind of where things fit. What are the priorities, and then a game plan, that roadmap for, rolling it out.
Well, one of the challenges I've seen when people don't do this is, we've had clients that we'll work with, maybe an outsourced software developer overseas, or they'll work with someone that maybe hasn't done it a number of times. And what they do is they go in with their big picture ideas. Nothing's vetted, nothing's prioritized, and then all of a sudden it's a 12-month development process to get your MVP out, but maybe you have a bunch of features that really aren't worth it. Or it's a situation where you're just kind of randomly throwing features at a developer and they're developing things as they go. There's just not a great game plan. And I think, especially if you're a service company and you've never done this before, you really want to make sure you have a plan before you have anybody sit at a keyboard and start writing code.
Yeah, because you can't assume that your development team is going to have this process in place. If you're leading the charge, if you're new to software development, you might have someone who's just going to take your dollars and say, I'll build whatever you tell me.
Working.
Yep, I can keep. And they see that big idea and they say, oh yeah, we can do all those things, and let's just put it on the list.
Yeah.
So I think having
everything
this plan,
has to start with strategic planning at the end of the day. I agree. And so really one of the things in evaluating features that we look at, kind of again that vetting prioritization process, is we look at the features that we have, and it's really looking at value. So what's the level of interest for the customer? What's the pain index? What's the complexity? How much internal planning, development, testing, how much accuracy is required to build it, and how much support might be needed for that feature? So complexity, we want to look at a number. And then stickiness, what's the usage frequency and level of requirement to their business? And we've talked about stickiness in other areas before, but a sticky feature is something that gets people to keep coming back. They need it, or it reduces the chances of them leaving. A great example is if you put a ton of data into a system and you're using reports, but you can't pull that out and get the same reports, it's sticky because you need that, and you're requiring the system to visualize or process that data. So we really want to look at value, complexity, and stickiness for each one of our features, and that should help us understand the vetting and prioritization.
So for your process here, you're actually rating each of these.
Exactly. So put it on a number system. Let's use some logic with it. Get in a room and talk it through and say, okay, well, maybe I think it's a 3 and you think it's a 5. Well, we should talk that out, score it, maybe individually or together, and then build some sort of Excel sheet at the very least to help decide what are the right features that we want to be doing. And then really the last piece is this agile software development. And again, we've kind of talked about it in the past a lot, but this is a model for how you develop software. And it's a process where it's about smaller steps at the end of the day versus the old way of software. Again, and I think we talked about this last time, is you think of the back in the days when you got a disc and you would go to Best Buy and you'd pull the box off the shelf, you'd go home, you'd put the disc in. Well, that was the model of old software development, where you had a year of development cycle, and you were figuring out the features, building them in, and then you had to send CDs out.
Because that had to be contained in that single piece, right? That executable had to launch that whole program that had every little element in there. Now the world is much different, right?
Well, everything's in the cloud, and so now we can be much more agile, and we can push a feature out and develop another feature and push it out, and this is a constant process. And you see some softwares where they're pushing out new features every 2 weeks, other ones every quarter, whatever it might be, but it's much more agile. And the benefit is that you can get a minimum viable product out faster. Let's choose 3 features, get it out there, get some feedback, but then that is the real power, is now we can put it out there and quickly get feedback. And if we would have developed a 1-year roadmap, we would be going off of our assumptions, getting no feedback, versus let's launch something in a month. We hear from users, we launch our next features, hear from users, maybe completely change the prioritization of what we were doing, launch the next features, and it's a much more quick decision-making process.
Yeah, because this is a process with feedback loops throughout. So we're always getting input to make better decisions continuously.
Right. And so today, if you're looking at developing a software, and if you're a service business, there are still some software developers out there with that old mindset of like, okay, give me a scope of 1,000 features, and then let's build that out for the next 8 months, launch your software, and then you can hire us again to do the next 20 features. And so if you haven't ever built software, you may not understand the agile model, but you really want to be going in that direction to quickly get an MVP out, see if it's viable and the audience likes it and is willing to pay for it, and then slowly keep adding and building to it.
How many discs do you think you should print? For your first shipment, right?
Exactly. I remember those days. Do you remember the days, the floppy disks, where you would get those and to install a program, you'd have to enter 30 of those? Man, Persia, what was the Persian? Did you ever play that?
No,
Prince of Persia, I think it is.
Okay.
Man, that is the days. So that's really all we're talking about in roadmap and prioritization. Again, I think the biggest thing, we've gone through a number of episodes where we talked about coming up with ideas and vetting those product ideas, and then really understanding the market and the desire for the product. And now we're taking that and bringing it to the next level where it's features, the pieces within the product, and again, trying to develop a system to do it intelligently. How do we put ideas into a bucket so we can maintain them? We're pulling those ideas from our users, our team, and the marketplace. Then we're using some sort of logical process with ratings and point systems to understand what's the value, complexity, and stickiness. And then we're pushing things into a backlog that can be leveraged with an agile process that's in sprints and launching things quickly and going. And that helps us really look at developing a smart roadmap that's small, chunked up, and can help get an MVP out and then build a fantastic product that sells.
Good stuff.
Summary there.
Good summary of it, for sure.
That's what we're looking at. So this was good. Next episode, what are we going to be talking about? Defining your model. So really we want to get into how are you going to be selling this and what's it structured like. There's a lot of different softwares out there, from the ones that you sell for a big license fee annually to cloud-based, freemium, free trial. There's a lot of different models that you can leverage. But there's some logical ways to think through that and help you determine what's right for you.
Sounds good.
Cool. Well, this is Friday. Tony's about to go get drunk. It's crazy. He's like, what are you, 14, 18, something around that?
Almost old enough
just
to
still
get
in high school.
that drink.
Yeah, that's right. Cool. All right. Well, we appreciate it. Go back and check our past episodes if you haven't. And then, show up next Friday and we'll have a new one for you.
We will see you guys next time.